All right, well, it looks like it's 7 o'clock, and let's go ahead and call ourselves to order and get a roll call.
Maria Ryan,
Here?
Stacy Gloss, Morgan Johnston,
Here.
Beth Mashusky, Todd Rusk, Andrew Stumpf,
Here.
Stephen Wald.
All right, we have a quorum, so I guess we'll go ahead and get rolling. Are there any changes to the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none, let's move to the approval of minutes from a previous meeting. Does somebody want to make a motion, and then we can discuss whether we have changes?
I move to approve the minutes from our previous meeting.
Is there a second? Okay, is there any discussion, any changes? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes as they appear in our packet signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right, those pass. And then we will move to public input. And if there are any members of the public who would like to address us this evening, you can come forward. We'll just have you state your name and your where you live for the record, and you'll have 5 minutes to talk with us. If you need more than 5 minutes, we can just get a sense from the body as to whether we'll extend it for any more than 5 minutes. You'll also have an opportunity after each of our agenda items. I'll also open the floor for public input as well. So is there any public input at this time? No? All right. Then let's move to communications and our staff report. Mr.
Good
Dress.
evening. I've got some updates on the Climate Action Plan first. We continue to work on a guaranteed energy savings project. Our most recent activity was we hosted a site visit for the 2 facilities that we're asking for proposals for. We're asking for proposals on 2 facilities and also qualifications from energy services companies, although when we move forward in the process, any of our facilities could potentially have a project, but just to narrow the scope and for evaluation purposes. We showed them 2 facilities and asked for proposals. The facilities we're interested in right now are the city building and the library. We had 4 energy services companies attend the site visit, so 4 companies that are interested, and then some of them brought along some representatives from local subcontractors that they would potentially be employing on the project. So the proposals for that are due June 2nd. At that point, we would evaluate the proposals as well as the qualifications of the companies, and then enter into an agreement for an investment grade energy audit. So that would be the deep dive on any and all facilities that might have energy savings. And then from that, we would choose projects. So lots of steps, many months still to go.
Hey,
Solar,
Scott?
yes.
Do you have, I know that this is probably part of the negotiation, but do you have a sense of what financial arrangements that, could look like, to be determined based on the bids received, or does the city have any kind of express preferences on how that might work?
So just for a scenario, there could be $1 million worth of energy improvements to make. Probably at that number, we would do a bond and pay for the work up front, and then pay off the bond over, say, 10 years with the energy savings. Is that what you were thinking? Yeah. Typically, the ESCOs themselves aren't doing lending. But they will help you arrange lending, whether it's a bond or some other type of loan. They have some level of expertise. Obviously, they've done a lot of these projects where the client, has a loan, so they'll help guide you on that. But typically, they aren't doing the lending themselves.
So the city's on the hook for the performance, basically.
Well, there will be a performance guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
So there will be a description of measurement and monitoring for some number of years. and there will be, and if the savings aren't realized, the ESCO would be on the hook for the difference. So that's the guaranteed
Right.
part of the energy savings project.
Okay.
What I've been told is that you may have a 10 or 15 year payback period for your bundle of energy projects. It's apparently not all municipalities are doing measurement and monitoring for that entire time, but they'll do it for, say, 5 years, and then presume, well, if it worked for 5 years, it's probably bona fide. And the reason they are choosing not to do measurement and monitoring the whole time is that's another cost on the cost side of your total deal. So there's a trade-off there.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Have you been in touch with Ameren at all about these projects and any available rebates they have for municipalities and any assistance or technical assistance that they'll provide resources for? For example, the deep dive energy audit that you just mentioned?
So we're already receiving, the before November, December scenario was that public sector energy efficiency incentives are routed through DCEO, Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, instead of Ameren. And we were receiving energy services, guaranteed energy savings contract, performance-based contracting, that's the phrase I'm looking for, performance-based contracting technical assistance through DCEO. So that technical assistance helped us create the RFP and kind of design how we want to proceed with this project. Additionally, there are DCEO incentives for the actual retrofits that you make. What's happened with the energy bill is that money has moved from, I believe the money's moved from DCEO to Ameren. There is an interim, short-term, maybe it's a year-long or less, energy efficiency program that is being determined presently, and that's just to get us to the new Future Energy Jobs Act Future Energy Jobs Act required energy efficiency program, which I don't know what that's going to look like exactly for another year. So all that to say is it's all in flux, and so there's no point learning what the incentives are at this point. When we get to the investment grade energy audit, the ESCO will take into account any expected incentives, and that'll be part of the pro forma. And at some point, we and/or probably the ESCO would be responsible for putting the data together and making the application. So there's a timing issue as things change. We have to either know what the future scenario is going to be for incentives or get our application in time before they change.
So Ameren and the other utilities, they need to submit their proposed plans for energy efficiency programs moving forward, 2018 through 2021, coming up in June. I don't know if that's by June 30th or if there's a different deadline for that. There's a input process now on those programs that is public at the ilsag.info website, and I believe that there are some presentations specifically related to Ameren's programs that might inform, generally speaking, where they're headed with the public sector energy efficiency benefits in the future. That would start sort of program year 2018.
Very good.
So there was that discussion was going on today. So the SAG, the SAG, that's the Stakeholder Advisory Group, that was going on today. So the plans are all in development. Ameren's plan is most likely going to look like what it has in the past. So just in terms of planning for the city through December 31st, not finalized, incentives will, for any projects that are going to be completed, incentives we can expect them that they will look somewhat similar to what they did under DCEO. Starting in January 1, they will look more like the private sector incentives. But I think what the city might be able to plan on with this ESCO project is, there's an incentive for a feasibility study, and so that might be like the investment grade audit. Typically there's a requirement to implement some proportion of the measures in order to recoup the incentive for that. So that's one thing. Another one is like a staffing grant, and so that would help to pay for the staffing to actually do coordination and implementation. And then there's implementation of the measure themselves. When after this whole process is played out and there's actually stuff going into buildings and stuff, then of course there's those too. But anyway.
I look forward to that phase. Any other questions on Guaranteed Energy Savings Project? Okay. Solar Urbana-Champaign has secured its first contract, and in fact that installation is already complete. I'm not sure if it's energized yet, but it is complete. And in fact we have just recently signed a second contract, so things are moving there. There are a number of proposals that are already out to, I think, mostly homeowners at this point, at least one business, and solar power hours are continuing. So I encourage everyone to share the emails and information for solar power hours. Everything centers around people attending the solar power hour and learning all about the purchasing opportunity.
I just want to make a comment. When we did this the first round, I brought it up at various meetings I was in, and some people were interested and other people don't really listen. And now I'm bringing it up in the same meeting, and the next group of people are listening and saying, oh yeah, I heard, I was thinking about that. So it's even though I'm going back to the same places and saying it again, it's we're getting that next group of people that were kind of interested but not enough to do something. Now they're hopefully actually doing things.
Great. Yeah, I think a lot of the power hours have been very well attended, so still getting a lot of interest. Staff are following the progress of a PACE bill in the Illinois General Assembly. PACE is Property Assessed Clean Energy. You may remember last year this body sent a recommendation to the mayor and council to send a letter of support for the PACE bill that ultimately failed last year. This PACE bill is different. It does not follow the what was the method that they used? Special service area. It does not follow the special service area format, but instead creates an entirely new format, which the legislation calls PACE areas. So just as a reminder, property assessed clean energy is a way for a commercial property owner to borrow money for an energy efficiency or a renewable energy improvement on their property and pay that loan back on a longer term on a special assessment on their property. So the term more closely matches the improvement, and the payment sticks with the property where the improvement is made, which does a couple things for the property owner. One, it doesn't add up on their own personal debt, so they still have borrowing capacity for other business purposes. Two, if they sell the property, the loan doesn't stick with them, it sticks with the property where the improvement also sticks. So it's a very powerful financing mechanism for energy efficiency and renewables. This bill does a couple of things that I think are advantageous for us. One, it allows third-party PACE area management or administration. It also allows the creators of a PACE area to hire either a nonprofit or a for-profit PACE administrator. Last year, the bill restricted that to a nonprofit administrator, which could be problematic in terms of how many experienced PACE administrators are out there, and then you remove an entire type. It also allows jurisdictions to combine together so that they can share a single larger PACE jurisdiction. There's not a lot of details in the bill how any of that would proceed, but that may be just something that municipalities work out after the fact. So this bill has in fact passed the General Assembly House, so it'll go to the Senate next. I don't know when it's going to be read again, but perhaps in the next session. So we'll follow that. Staff has conducted a number of public engagement opportunities lately. This is the time of year. Spring is very active for different public engagement opportunities. We were at the Home and Garden Show, which was at Lincoln Square this year, which was nice. We also were participating in a Green Jobs panel at Parkland College. And we also participated in a meeting convened by the Institute for Sustainability, Energy, and the Environment at the University of Illinois. That meeting was convened with local stakeholders to evaluate and strategize climate resilience activities. And there will be more meetings scheduled for that. Morgan, do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. So resilience is about adapting to the climate change that is happening or is expected to be happening, while our climate action plans generally are about mitigating our impact and what we're doing to make it worse. So this is really trying to bridge the gap between the university faculty who are researching this. I mean, we have whole centers on resilience or whatever. I don't know all their names, but the groups of that, with the community staff like Scott, who are working on it full time and trying to draw connections there. And then that's the overarching idea of the Joint Task Force on Resilience. And then the next year we'll be assessing our vulnerabilities to the climate impacts that we are already seeing and expecting. So it's a process.
Thanks. I have a quick update on the Sustainable Water Management Plan. We had some goals regarding developing resilient landscape practices. So we were aiming towards reducing not just water consumption, but also inputs of labor and fuel. One thing we're expanding there is the Arbor Division is expanding their testing of a low-mow fine fescue blend as a ground cover. They've got some at the Boneyard Creek project already, but they're doing a strip on a median near Public Works. So it's near the corner of Philo and Washington. So the turf grass that was already there, we have to mow regularly. So that has been herbicided, and they've planted the low-mow fescue, which would allow the Arbor Division to come in and mow it twice a year instead of maybe twice a month during, some part of the season. So just another opportunity for us to, be more efficient in our landscape practices. U-Cycle is working on the electronics recycling event. Just a reminder, we do an online registration system instead of making folks queue for miles and miles. They register for a time slot, and either they have a time slot or they don't. So if they have a time slot, they zoom in and don't have hardly any wait at all. If they don't have a time slot, then they don't waste their time. That registration is full. We do take note of anyone who calls, and we put them on a waiting list in case someone cancels their registration. We can also email them the next time around when we have another event if they provide their email. But the event is full, so still lots of demand for recycling CRT TVs. U-Cycle staff also shared some information and conducted an Earth Day presentation to pre-K students at Chesterbrook Academy at the U of I Research Park. Staff is also participated in the first meeting for the Household Hazardous Waste Leadership Team. This is a county-wide, perhaps a little bit broader stakeholder group that is meeting to do a couple of things. One, plan for some one-day household hazardous waste collection events. Many of you know yourself or others who are stockpiling materials that they know shouldn't go in the landfill, but there's no place else to put them, like say oil-based paint or solvents. So we understand that that's all stacking up in people's garages, and we want to have an opportunity to get some of that out. Furthermore, they're going to be looking at what it will take and what we need to ask for in terms of developing a permanent household hazardous waste collection facility. A permanent facility would be something that might be open 1 or 2 days a week, but year-round, so that we don't have a huge amount of household hazardous waste on 1 day per every 6 years, but rather a steady stream day in and day out.
Scott, does that tie in some way back to the electronic collection, or are you guys very clearly keeping e-waste outside of that dialogue?
Remains to be seen. My expectation is that if you have a household hazardous waste event or a facility, you're probably also going to want to take electronics. Excepting the CRT TVs, electronics have more recoverable value than any of the other household hazardous waste, so you might as well take it and offset some of your costs. The TVs, and the CRT monitors and TVs continue to be a huge financial drain, though. So that's going to be a difficult question moving forward as to whether such an event or such a facility would accept the TVs since they're expensive to dispose of. But I would think things like other computer components probably would be in the mix since they have some amount of recoverable value. Next SAC meeting would be June 6th, 7 p.m., Council Chambers.
Are there any other comments or questions for staff?
Going back to the PACE legislation, do you know which organizations are supporting that or doing any presentations about PACE?
I know that the Environmental Law and Policy Center is following it and I think supportive.
Okay. To follow up on that, I'm wondering, depending on the timeline, if they think that's going to pass or not, if we could have a presentation in the kind of Champaign-Urbana area for local property owners. I guess it would be for business owners. It didn't sound like this is going to be for residential.
You're correct.
So maybe bring a presentation like that here and to open that up to the public. I noticed that a previous presentation, PDF about PACE, is online and it is available through a CDAC website. I don't know how old it is. I guess I'm looking at Dad.
Yeah, I don't think that's a recent item. We're working on it.
I think a lot remains to be determined on PACE. The final wording of the bill, interpretations of the bill. Certainly myself and staff for the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and staff for Cook County have all discussed it, are all very interested, and I think would be first to tackle whatever opportunity the bill creates if it passes. Also, ELPC, Environmental Law and Policy Center, is interested in it, and I think they would be a resource for communities that wanted to investigate a PACE program. But at this point, it's hard to know whether to spend any time on it, in terms of whether it'll pass, and also how to spend time in terms of what the interpretation is for the bill.
Other comments or questions? Are there any members of the public who would like to address us at this time? All right. Let's move to, we don't have any continuing business this evening, so let's move to new business and the capital improvement projects discussion. And I know, Todd, you had requested this one. Do you want to get the ball rolling on it, or? Sure. Okay.
So we received a copy of a capital planning, a proposed capital plan, and this was, I think, presented by Public Works to the council. I think this was the last fiscal year. It's a long document. There's a lot of projects, but one thing that really struck me was, looking at the volume of infrastructure that's in place, and the pending projects, is we spend a lot of time thinking about energy and water, and just I don't know, the document kind of puts in perspective the magnitude of the hydrologic impact that the city has. And so I see, in looking in the document, I see, it's the capital stock essentially is roads, sewers, storm sewers and sanitary sewers, drainage infrastructure, and then to a lesser extent parking lots. There's also some coverage on buildings, but the city doesn't have a ton of buildings, and then of course there's the street lights and traffic lights. And so one of the thoughts and this is before having looked at looking at the proposal, was that this, getting ourselves integrated with the long-range capital planning process, maybe that's an opportunity to think about some of the sustainability goals of the city, and to reflect on, are the long-range capital plans reflecting those goals, and just from looking at some of the things that pop out, I do see that there is there's some reflection of bike paths. I see the Boneyard Creek improvements, and mention of sustainability and impact on the budget. One thing that I wonder though is just, and so I don't know what the process looks like for us, so I guess that's one of the. So I guess one of the questions is the extent to which this group is capable of and interested in some type of review process, or of the capital budget as it emerges, or some type of involvement, or some type of review of long-range capital projects. As I look through the document, I think about things like, are we? Is there an explicit connection to the pedestrian and the bike plan that we have in the community? Do we have, can we see an explicit connection to the long-range transportation plan and things like the Mayor's Monarch Pledge and the Climate Action Plan, and the Sustainable Water Management Plan? And just so those are some of the things that that I'm thinking about, and sometimes my eyes glaze over as I see another line item, a line item of resurfacing, But you know, that's a major job of the cities, is, you know, like
Yeah,
the.
but it's good to resurface. That means you're maintaining what you have.
Yeah, I
instead
understand
of
that,
building
yeah.
new and sprawling out.
Yep, yep. So just a reminder that one of the jobs of the city is, you know, roads and that kind of stuff. So one thing that caught my eye in particular was it looked like a future possible budget recommendation for something along the lines of $200,000 for a stormwater master plan. And that just, you know, that seemed like a really good idea, and it seemed, and it also sounded like it was, you know, maybe around the 2018 time frame. So anyways, in the not too distant future, obviously it's not in the budget right now, and it's not a current action item. But that to me was one maybe explicit opening into a process for you know, maybe bringing some of these different plans together with the capital planning process, and you know, maybe making a little bit more explicit some of the connections, but also a little bit more intentional to integrate some of those plans into the capital planning process. And you know, maybe some of that is going on already. I just don't, you know, I just don't see it. So those were, you know, those are some initial thoughts, and I don't know if there's any, you know, any other comments or questions or feedback at this point. But I guess that's a start.
You know, I was actually just going through the first cap one, and I know we had some discussion at that time, and it was certainly in one of our early drafts of, you know, exactly this idea of, you know, kind of taking a look at. I know the long range transportation plan was listed, and I don't know if we had the capital improvement plan or not, but right off the cuff, I'm not finding it in the draft, the final draft. But you know, the idea has some precedent with this group, and I just don't remember kind of what route that took
Okay.
back, you know, 8 or 9 years ago.
Well, it sounds
Yeah.
familiar.
Yeah. And I don't know, Scott, if you recall seeing it in any of the final versions of documents.
I don't recall. However, with a new mayor and council, you know, it's another opportunity to, you know, review the manner in which the city wants to create these plans.
Well, one question is, I think you mentioned that, you know, was it Brad Bennett might come in and present on it sometime, and so some questions are, you know, just process by which projects become elevated to, you know, being recommended, and which ones get deferred, and then, you know, just thinking about what are the goals, like what are we trying to realize? I mean, obviously there's, you know, to have properly maintained roads and to have drainage, and to what extent are some of these other goals that are more recent, you know, like the, and you know, to the extent that the city may eventually be on the hook for stormwater quality. You know, I wonder the extent to which that becomes elevated as a criteria.
In a certain sense, the city's already on the hook for stormwater quality. It's just not numeric criteria, which are very specific. But I think every single year, the one of the engineering sections, development and drainage, does a report for the stormwater permit that the city holds, and it's
Is that NPDES?
correct.
Okay.
It's a somewhat narrative report. We talk about activities, expenditures, projects, public engagement. But as you said, there is not yet numeric criteria. And so whether that's coming or not, I don't know, but always improving our stormwater management from both a quantity and a quality perspective is certainly desirable. And that's why we have the stormwater utility, so there's a dedicated funding source for that, which is also paying for the rain barrel rebates for the sale this Saturday from 9 to noon in the parking lot north of the city building.
Nice plug.
Thank you. Also, there are other elements of somewhat what you're talking about. How do other sustainability-related elements integrate into the capital improvement plan? I know that this may be old news. I don't know if it's current, but I know that in the past, some of the bike infrastructure that mostly accounted for painting stripes happened or was timed to happen when a street was resurfaced. So, for instance, they didn't bother painting a bike lane one year and then resurfacing and having to paint it all over again the next year, that sort of thing. Whether those opportunities are spent or not, or whether there's more coming, I don't know. And Craig Schonkweiler, their assistant city engineer, is responsible for the bicycle master plan and also the roadway element of the capital improvement plan. So a few thoughts.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I did actually find it in Cap 1 now. It's under 3.2, Goal 5, Action 1, coordinate city plans and policies with climate action goals. And so we have, in order to assist the city in reaching its greenhouse gas reduction goal, the Sustainability Advisory Commission will review and make recommendations on city plans, legislation, policies, and projects, including comprehensive plan updates, capital improvement plan, downtown strategic plan updates, ordinances related to building energy use such as building codes, transportation projects, major land use and development issues, city and regional transportation plans, including the LRTP, bicycle and pedestrian master plan, greenways and trails plan, subdivision and land development code, other policies, plans, and ordinances whose content relates to greenhouse gas emissions, including but not limited to transportation, economic development, and land use. So we have a pretty broad category of things that we did build into the initial
Perfect.
plan. So
Yeah, so I kind of have two sides of an opinion about it. I'm feeling both issues here. So one of them is that this plan is developed based on all these other plans. I'm familiar with just sort of how they go through the process. I don't think it says it in this document, though, because it actually says, it just says following goals and policies and priorities, right? But the majority, or not the majority, but a lot of this is streets and infrastructure, so bikeways and transportation, which are in the LRTP and the bike plan and the greenways and trails plan. And so those are coordinated. I think that the aspect of it kind of has it already, like when I look at it, I'm not worried that they're doing something outside of what we've kind of established as our goals. But I am curious if, I mean, it's called out as one in the CAP. I did not know that. And it's a plan, but is it something that has public input? Do they go through a public input process? I don't know
the
they
answer to that.
don't. So maybe if there was an opportunity just for us to get to know more about how it's put together, if Craig or whoever could come and tell us how they go about putting it together, and then that would get us more informed about where the opportunities are, because I think that when they say the priorities, that those are coming straight out of council priorities and comprehensive plan decisions and things like that. So I'm kind of two-sided on it.
And I think Brad Bennett will be here to talk about the capital improvement plan next month. And so that's probably a question he can answer and a process he can describe.
other comments, other thoughts?
This might be kind of specific, but for any capital improvement projects related to stormwater management, I think it would be really great for the public to see like maybe some signage or something about like how it works and where the water comes from, where it goes. Maybe something about like the types of plants in the area so they could plant that in their yard too. So.
Just, one other, I don't know if this is the right place or if it's, I mean, maybe it's a question for Brad when he comes here, but, we've talked about different innovations like permeable pavements. I mean, LED in street lighting is less of an innovation now, but now what I'm seeing on the cutting edge is like occupancy sensing in outdoor lighting and other means of control. And so, I know that the city doesn't, no city wants to be like a guinea pig and on the bleeding edge. But is there, I guess what I wonder, is there some interest in having like a small cutout for, real world trial of stuff, like not a huge budget impact, but, when would we ever, where and when would we ever try out permeable pavers if we never do? What conditions? Or, Gary was pushing for the those roundabout intersections. And so anyways, I just, I wonder if there might be some kind of, developmental technology testing kind of component, just to put a thought out there.
To me, it sounds like what you're getting at a little bit is looking at how this body either responds to actionable items, measures that are occurring by the city versus what initiatives, how are we getting involved at the outset, and what initiatives and what advocacy are we getting involved with and pushing. And so I think I hear you saying that you'd like to be on the latter side, which is involved in that maybe process more from the beginning and providing input and direction, and less on in the position that we are just to respond, for example, to the proposals that are on the table and may sort of fall out the way they fall out anyway, despite public input process. And then I think also the third piece, which I really like, is how do we become a little incubator, or how do we create a little incubator for these types of projects to test them out in our community, whether that's through maybe, I don't know if that's through partnership with the university or if there's funds available from the city to test out maybe emerging technologies.
Is there any further discussion? And I don't know if, we're seeking any particular formulation of action this evening, or if this was more to get the discussion on the table.
I think it was just to get some discussion on the table, and I don't have a formal proposal other than I would like to continue exploring. Is there something, and what, and to figure out if so, then what would that process be, and how do we engage it? I mean, really, what I have are some, here's an interest, an observation, and some questions.
I'm wondering if we could, specifically, you said that Brad's coming.
Mm-hmm.
If we could specifically ask him not only what is the process and the existing, just sort of typical system they use for input, because there is public input because it has to have city council approval. So is that the place for the input? That's your basic public input. And then what opportunities do they think would be reasonable for working with us? Is it something that right towards the beginning they could share here some of the direction they're headed with? It's important for me that we don't burden them with our input, but that we find things that we can do to work together. And so if they, we express the interest, if we can actually ask him to sort of come with what would make sense from their side, I think that'd be a good next step.
Because it seems like if we are involved in the process, even like a circular process, then really our suggestions or our plan up front doesn't really take into account their strategy. So if we have a say and then we come back to them after we see their plan, then it can be a circular process of of getting to the strategy we want, I guess.
Well, I mean, that sounds to me like a pretty clear next step would be to have some of this discussion next time with Brad present, and obviously if Brad can be given a heads up ahead of time to,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Anything else on this one this evening? All right, well, thanks for bringing that forward.
Thanks for entertaining me.
All right. Are there any comments from the public on this topic? All right, then let's move to. I've gotten buried in a pile of documents here. Okay, we've got the forthcoming U-Cycle contract.
Wrong one. So I wanted to share some information and reflections on the U-Cycle program as we're coming towards a new contract term. First, by way of review, this is a snapshot of some rounded figures of the scale of the curbside, that's single family up to 4 attached units recycling service, and the multifamily recycling service. So tax revenue for U-Cycle is mailed separately from property taxes because it's not a per mill, it's a flat per household. So it gets mailed separately. Originally, the tax revenue funded just the recycling collection. At different points in time, other services were added. Leaf bags, leaf collection, and Christmas tree collection. I think that's 4 times in the fall and 2 in the spring for bag to leaf, and of course just two consecutive weeks in January for Christmas tree collection. And that budget, I think, is up to about $85,000. We are also in a league of our own collecting batteries from the public for some number of years, and both rechargeable, the ones that have value, and single-use alkaline, the batteries that do not have value. I'm very pleased that Champaign is now also collecting batteries at some of their facilities. So any Champaign residents that were sneaking over to Urbana now can conveniently drop their batteries at Champaign collection locations. We also added electronics, thermometer, and thermostat recycling. There is I think it's an industry-funded nonprofit that recycles thermostats. That's been fairly easy to do for some number of years. But thermometer recycling, mercury thermometer recycling, is something we've added just recently. We don't get a lot, but it's one of those items that has high toxicity. So we added that recently. Not a lot of financial impact, although the impact per thermometer, for instance, is substantial. And then pharmaceutical recycling, expired pills. You may notice that the collection container in the lobby here is gone. The police were having some problems with the design of that collection container. They've commissioned a new design, and they're making some final amendments to that, and should be installed shortly. So these are all things that we've added to the U-Cycle program. There have been occasional increases in the U-Cycle fee. So some of these expenses have been covered, but it's been an expanding program. The U-Cycle, how we say commodities collection, that's the curbside mixed single stream recycling collection, has been done on 5-year contracts with an optional 2-year extension. Our current 2-year extension after our previous 5-year contract expires in March 2018, and we're working to have that bid and agreed before Thanksgiving. Some elements that we're considering changing in this next contract cycle. The contract for U-Cycle is always stipulated a 7:30 a.m. start time for collection. In our both Urbana and Champaign, that's very late. Both Urbana and Champaign have no start time for private garbage haulers. Additionally, Urbana's construction noise ordinance allows construction, so circular saws and hammering to start at 7. So it seems reasonable that the recycling collection could also start at 7. This is particularly important for multifamily recycling, which is backing into apartments off of Lincoln Avenue. So you can imagine that they want to do that as early as possible, as that is relatively dangerous. Another change we're considering is accepting bulky rigid plastics. So these are, think of a 5-gallon bucket or some molded plastic toy, provided that it has a recycle code and that it fits in the U-Cycle container. These are things that the people may already be putting in their U-Cycle container, and the vendor may already be recycling them, sorting them, and sending them off, baling them and sending them off for material recovery. But it hasn't been in the contract. So we thought that was a worthy one to consider. We're also considering some vehicle disclosure. So what I mean by that is the vendors describing some of the details of the collection vehicle that they intend to use. I had looked at and considered whether there was a way we could use the contract to drive, pardon the pun, more efficient collection vehicles in use by our vendors. And there's two possible outcomes there. One, we set some fuel economy standard of some sort, which practically speaking means stipulating a vehicle that was manufactured after such date. But there's two outcomes. One is we stipulate some level of performance, and either the winning bidder already has a vehicle that meets that, and we haven't actually changed anything, or they win the bid and have to go out and buy a truck, which they would have factored into their price, which means we pay for it. So I can't find a way around increasing city costs.
Is this a bid that is a straight price, or is it a proposal that is an evaluation matrix?
It's a strict quote. So if we, for instance, let's say there's 3 bidders, and let's say none of them have the newest, most energy efficient compactor truck. Well, they all know they would have to buy it if they win. They build that into the price, and we get 3 bids that are, taking into account amortizing a $200,000 piece of equipment over a 5-year contract. I'm not sure that we have the appetite for that at this point in time. So one step short of that would be, let's at least learn where we stand with collection vehicles. Let's get some disclosure. There is a garbage hauler licensing procedure in the city where vehicle make, model, and such is disclosed to the city. However, it does not apply to recycling collection vehicles. So we would get that information, and then we can evaluate whether our franchised service is operating old, high-polluting vehicles, or whether it's in some acceptable level. Was there a question? No? Yeah.
I think I was going to say almost exactly what you just said, which
Okay.
was we can require the information, but not tie a performance goal to it in the next program year or in the next bid, with the goal to move towards something, move towards a program goal
Right.
in the bid after that. But I think that the information gathering phase might be appropriate. I can't imagine that the vendors are going to love this requirement.
Well, if it's paid for in the in the fees paid to the vendor throughout the 5-year term contract, maybe they don't mind. But I envision that we're paying for it.
Do you have any idea, just out of curiosity, what the cost is for one of these trucks?
I don't. I suspect it's several hundreds of thousands. Yeah.
I will tell you that there are hybrid waste hauling trucks out there. So the technology's starting, but they're way more expensive. I don't know the dollars either.
Or if they run on biodiesel?
Produce their own fuel as they go down the street.
I would actually, we can ask the fuel economy, but if, I have a hybrid car and it has some listed fuel economy and I can share that, I could look it up, right, and say that if I was going to fill it out, but maybe asking them for more specific, like what is the make and model, the year, and the current mileage, and ask them to tell us just the mileage, the list of vehicles with current mileage every year. It's not incredibly difficult to do, so it shouldn't add a lot to the cost for them to do that,
Right.
and we would be able to do some evaluations of the economy ourselves.
Right. Another element we're looking at amending, the existing contract has some language asking vendors to tag recycling carts that contain inappropriate materials that cannot be collected with a form, and it calls for a triplicate form. I can't remember last time I saw one of those. We are in fact utilizing that element of the contract, but we're just using sort of a waxed paper with I think it maybe has a rubber band or something to attach it to carts, and so the purpose there is to indicate to a resident who collects their cart in the evening and finds that it's still full, to indicate to them that they put something inappropriate in there, which hopefully will save everyone a couple of phone calls. There's this information on the tag and website, and it's likely that a person will be able to determine what went wrong. So that's essentially a language cleanup. We're also considering adding a price for mixed recyclables dumpsters for multifamily units. The multifamily recycling service, the city pays for that on a per can basis. So 100 apartments times 10 cans each, and there's a fixed price per can, something like that. However, we have both mixed recycle cans for multifamily and cardboard only, and those are how many cans are at a building changes from time to time. Whether a building has cardboard recycling changes from time to time, and what we're anticipating, or perhaps hoping, but what we want to be prepared for, is the possibility that a building like Campus Circle that was constructed on University, if a building like that plans to have a trash chute for residents that live on the 6th, 7th, 10th floor to dump their trash in, which goes all the way down to a dumpster or a compactor on the ground floor, that it would be possible for the architect to also design a recycling chute, and that recycling chute would lead recyclables to a dumpster for mixed recyclables on the ground floor, and that we would have a contract that would have a fixed price, a set price for that type of service. I don't know that in the next 5 to 7 years of this contract, if we're going to have a multi-story building where the architect's going to design 2 chutes, but I'd like to be prepared for it, and I'd like to be able to accommodate an architect that might be interested in that. Multifamily buildings have to pay the recycling tax, whether they use recycling, whether their residents use recycling. So they may be interested in that element. Any questions on that page? Some items that we presumably will not be changing. First is curbside collection zones. The zones are different in terms of size, in terms of the number of homes. For the multifamily, it's different, but for curbside, it's done by zone, and they're also different in terms of street pattern. And I mention that because there may be U-cycle curbside zones, or a zone that is larger than another zone, but it may have a street pattern that makes collection shorter. Or actually, probably a better example is a curbside zone that has more houses, but a more fine-grained, compact, shorter street pattern. So they may be able to collect more cans in the same amount of time as, say, another zone that has a more curvilinear cul-de-sac type street pattern where there are less houses, but they're spread out. There's maybe more lane miles, more turns. So we haven't heard any complaints from our vendor in terms of, any particular day being too long and any particular day being too short. And out of consideration that changing someone's U-cycle collection day when it's been the same for, 15 years, 20 years, not sure, could be a significant impact for those folks who experience that change. So we just don't feel any pressure or any compelling need to make such a change at this time. Another item that we considered in some detail was whether we should add expanded polystyrene, EPS, also known as styrofoam, brand name, as a material that would be collected curbside in the U-cycle. And I apologize, I forgot to send it Friday afternoon in your packet, but I sent it today. Courtney Kwong put together a really wonderful review of all the elements of, yes, it's in front of you now, all the elements of expanded polystyrene recycling. We did a lot of literature review. We talked about it a lot. And there are a lot of barriers to collecting polystyrene. It tends to contaminate the load as it is broken, turned over, squashed, sorted, tipped on the tipping floor. It tends to break up into the individual little, spheres of polystyrene that make the larger whole. So it tends to cause contamination. It's also likely expensive. Polystyrene, I think her report says, is 97, expanded polystyrene is 97% air, which means you're collecting a lot of volume for essentially no product, no content. And so there's a cost to all that volume, but not a lot of return in terms of material. There is a market for polystyrene once it's been densified. The value is not very good. I think the report has some comparisons of the value. There is one densifier in town owned by a material recovery facility, owned by the university, being used by a material recovery facility. That presents perhaps a competitive bidding problem when only one vendor has this extremely expensive piece of equipment provided by the university. There is a new and very useful option for polystyrene recycling, which is not curbside, but DART, formerly Solo Cup Manufacturing Facility, which manufactures non-expanded polystyrene, that is dense polystyrene, plastic cups, has a facility on their campus where they're accepting styrofoam for recycling. So that's a nice option. The last thing I want to mention is in terms of the volume of polystyrene. I think Courtney's report says that according to national statistics, polystyrene is something like 1% of the total waste stream, whereas, say, the total waste stream including recyclables before they're pulled out, as compared to, say, food scrap, which is 20% of the total waste stream before recyclables are pulled out. We're also considering the possibility that as retailers decide themselves, and cities decide through ordinances to switch things like polystyrene food containers to paper or other recyclable materials, that this may not be a growing market. So, 20 years ago, you definitely would have wanted to include water bottles, plastic water bottles in your recycling service because that's a growing market. It's not clear that, say, polystyrene is going to be a growing market. There are home delivery packaging that is now formed paper pulp instead of polystyrene, instead of blocky styrofoam. So all those things really have driven us towards not including polystyrene curbside at this point in time. In the end, with all these barriers, it would likely increase costs for the service. Any questions on that?
Mine's a simple question. On the Where to Take It website, will the DART location be added as a...
I would think it already is, but
I
if
haven't checked recently.
okay, if it isn't, we'll definitely add it.
I just wanted to mention that the 1% of the solid waste stream in the U.S. is by weight. So I'd be interested to know if there are any statistics by volume, since styrofoam is like 97% air.
Right. Good point.
Let's see. Oh, the document that you gave us also mentioned that on windy days, styrofoam could potentially blow out of open air containers. I wonder if there's already contamination from like plastic bags blowing out or lighter plastic items, and if a cost analysis had been done to maybe switch out the open air bins to closed bins.
Yeah, great points. We have, I don't remember the numbers now. I think we have a sense of what it was, several hundred bins. So the small open top recycling bins that the city used to use for all households for recycling. We don't give those out anymore for a lot of reasons. One, if you ever see one on curbside, it's almost always overflowing because I think they're just too small for most households. Two, for the reason you just pointed out, materials blow away, and so we end up with litter. So anyone with a bin that would like a closed-top recycling cart, two-wheeled cart, need only ask. We provide those at no additional charge. It's already paid for in the recycling tax. And we definitely encourage folks to switch out their bin for a closed-top cart. There's additional challenge even with the closed-top carts. We do have occasional litter problems when there is significant wind, when the cart is tipped into the back of the dumpster. So things like plastic bags and light paper can blow away. So that's something we're already struggling with.
So has Urbana considered doing a ban on styrofoam food containers?
We haven't had any requests from leadership to evaluate a ban. Certainly we casually observe bans and taxes in other cities for things like polystyrene and plastic bags. There are a few cities in the U.S. that have that. It tends to attract a lot of lobbying attention from related industry groups and maybe occasionally lawsuits, I'm not sure. But it's not something we've been asked to evaluate at this point.
I was also considering the financial impact to local businesses when switching out to a non-styrofoam container, because I'm assuming they're more expensive.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at, say, the per unit or the per package, when you buy, say, a package of 1,000 or something, say, clamshell to-go containers, when you look at the per unit costs, it doesn't look like much. But if you look at the percent change from going from a polystyrene, a styrofoam clamshell container to a plastic or a waxed paper. It's a significant jump. Obviously, there's a lot of businesses that don't use the styrofoam, but there is a cost implication.
Have you considered a maybe just like a public awareness campaign, or just like consider these facts when,
I don't think we've conducted anything that would be, say, business facing or consumer facing, but it's an opportunity, sure. Yeah. A lot of folks, when they go to dinner, they know they're going to have leftovers, and if you know that, you can bring your own container. But of course, you have to think about that before you get there. I tend to remember after I order, right?
So one thing, there are salad places in Chicago that like sell you a plastic bowl that you're supposed to bring back with you when you get your lunch. They don't do something that either you can't recycle or would throw away. So I thought that was really interesting. But I am wondering, could you go back to the first slide? That one. So I just wanted to look at the differences between the tax revenue from single family and multi-revenue against the total. Is that U-cycle spend? Is that the total U-cycle expenditure?
Yes, that might be the budget rather than what we actually spend. So
Okay.
we have a budget that says we're allowed to spend so much on this item, this item, this item. Of course, we don't spend every last dollar of each of those budget lines. So this might be actually the budget amount. I didn't give you precise figures. This would be from a budget that is almost a year old now because we're coming to the end of this current budget. But I want to give you a sense of scale.
Okay, but I guess it is just worth noting or saying that the program here itself looks like it is fairly well balanced.
Or you could describe it as tight.
So this may be coming out of just my ignorance, but can you explain why U-cycle is only for residential and what possibilities there have been considered about public places like the schools and the libraries and for-profit sector businesses? What are those options, and are there things that, like, we've been talking about working with the schools to increase their, the K through 12 involvement with sustainability, and yet I know some of the schools don't have recycling bins throughout them, and so can you just
Sure.
overview on that?
Sure. We'd have to check. So curbside and multifamily recycling are described by ordinance, and that may constrain the ability to do something there with commercial. In fact, I think it does. We do already provide recycling on the street. So we have, for the most part, two neighborhoods, downtown and the Philo Road Business District, where we provide garbage and recycling cans on the street. That is, trying to remember if that is paid for by U-cycle. So we do that. In terms of commercial, well, let's touch on schools real quick. In terms of schools, there's no ordinance that would require them to do that. They have their own board and their own tax district to pay for recycling, and so I think we view it as within their jurisdiction. In terms of commercial recycling, there is an ordinance that requires all licensed garbage haulers to provide recycling service, to offer recycling service, or to make available recycling service to the city or to their customers. It does not require them to directly provide it, but they must be prepared to say subcontract it. So that's on ordinance. I don't know that there's a lot of cities. There surely must be some that require commercial recycling, but that's certainly something that city leadership could consider at some time. It's often a very different service than it looks more similar to our multifamily recycling service rather than the sort of very regular collection that curbside gets. Businesses have dramatically different sizes and dramatically different waste streams depending on the type of business. So.
Maybe us as a committee could co-draft a letter with the high school students to the Board of Education in Urbana to recommend that recycling be implemented.
And I think they do, in fact, have some recycling in the school districts. I see recycling cans, I put it that way, in the schools. I don't have any details about what they collect or, what that service looks like, but. Any other questions up to this point?
All right. Are there any questions or comments from members of the public?
I have
Oh, I'm
another
sorry.
slide. Sorry, I've just
Oh,
wanted
sorry
before I
about that.
moved on.
Okay.
Okay, a few big picture thoughts. Most materials that we're collecting for recycling can't pay for themselves, can't pay for their own cost to be recycled. U-Cycle, our program, goes well beyond the low cost and no cost materials. For instance, plastic grocery bags, glass. With limited funding, I think our view should be focusing on harm reduction rather than just thinking about the materials that we don't like and want to get recycled, or the materials that perhaps are in a lot of volume. Harm could be defined as some combination of volume and intensity. So how much of some material you have is harmful in terms of, we have to haul it and we have to landfill it. And the intensity is, if you don't recycle it, what's the degree of harm, say, per unit, or you could say toxicity. And that's the potential to damage, let's say, health, safety, and quality of life. In some instances, as some folks mentioned, prohibitions may be more feasible than recycling some materials. When we think and staff thinks about what we have left in the garbage can, so after we pull out all the recyclable items and put them in the U-Cycle container, when we think about what's left in the garbage can that has a lot of volume, we think of food scrap. It was in Courtney's report that before recyclables are pulled out, food scrap is about 20%. So it's even higher after we pull out all of the recyclables that we collect. Other items in terms of volume in our left in our garbage can after recycling include things like plastic films, so that's shrink wrap, Ziploc bags, cellophane, all those sort of items. But food scrap comes to our mind as an opportunity that is in high volume. When we think about materials left in our garbage can that have a high intensity to harm, we think about household hazardous waste. So things like oil-based paint, solvents, degreasers, chlorinated solvents, other chemicals in your store, in your garage, or under the sink or in the basement. And so those are the items that we think are opportunities that we should think about in the future, in terms of that sort of harm reduction criteria. Any comments on that before I go forward?
I'm wondering if we have a sense of risk, how like large or small in terms of volume, East Coast, it's, pretty well known there's a shortage of places to put these materials. I've never heard that that's the case around here, and I don't know if that is. But is there a sense of a risk on, you know, volume and capacity of landfill, and is that maybe a cost consideration at least that we would have to contend with at some point in the future?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of permitted space at the Danville landfill. I'm not sure about the Clinton landfill. However, some may remember 20, 30 years ago, there was a discussion to site a landfill in Champaign County. I'm told that there are boxes and boxes of paperwork on that, and it never got cited. And I mention that as that's the element of risk, is that it's hard to cite pollution control facilities, which
Nobody
a
wants
landfill
them.
is. It nobody wants it. Well, some people do. It is a revenue stream, no doubt. Certainly, the Clinton landfill worked to permit a hazardous waste unit, I believe it was, or some sort of higher grade landfill, and ultimately it was not permitted. So again, I think that's the risk. Not that I think presently we have a lot of nearby landfill capacity. In the next few decades, that's probably not a high risk, although you can't predict growth. If the market area for that landfill has a lot of growth, that capacity will fill up more, presumably.
Yeah.
Other things that are hard to predict is our material culture. We used to all have big phones and big computers. Now we have little phones and little laptops. It's hard to know what the material culture holds in store. What's going to get thrown away. But I think that's what the volume risk is.
So in terms of risk on high intensity, so household hazardous waste, what's our sense of, incidence of, or the effects of, so like, you mentioned, okay, well, everyone's storing stuff in their garage, and so do we have events? And do we know the, is there any sense of the potential risk of impacts of some of those events that could be, or, any of those kinds of things?
It's really hard to determine because what we're talking about are
It's a big class of stuff.
Yeah, it's I don't know, thousands of types of chemicals in unknown quantities, controlled by 17,000 different households. Are they all storing them, waiting year upon year for the stakeholders, the cities in this area to put together a one-day collection? Not all of them. Some of that is going into the landfill. Landfills, even the best designed ones, have leachate collection systems and monitoring wells because sooner or later they're going to have a leak. Our aquifer is a long ways away from the landfills and the surface, but there's hydraulic connections most likely here or there. And so the risk that would be realized would be we don't pull these hazardous materials out of the landfill stream and recycle them through a hazard or landfill them in a hazardous waste landfill or recycle them through hazardous waste disposal, and those materials end up in the aquifer. At which point we'd pay to clean it out of the water that we pump for drinking water. So that's the risk. Right now we have very, very high quality groundwater. So impacts of that increase the cost. So we'd like to avoid that. There are other, potential problems that materials are dumped into a surface water, materials are dumped on land. All those possible exposures are the risks on the intensity or toxicity side. Other things that you could go on. There's a risk of households storing chemicals in their garage that could be exposed to children. there's a risk of storing chemicals that degrade and react themselves or with each other over time. It's all risk that we're accumulating and not properly disposing of.
So I had remembered something about a landfill closing soon in our region, so I just pulled up this website. The EPA actually does a report every January of landfill capacity and projected life based on current utilization. So for our region, which they've designated Region 4, the McLean County landfill as of January 1, 2016 had 1.3 years left. It's closing soon. It's going to be full. The Brickyard had 15 years, 15 and a half. Brickyard in Danville. There are 7 total. Clinton still has close to 50. There's one called the Illinois landfill with 185 years life expectancy. But they also take a look at the total capacity and the rate of combining them all for this region. And the region space as of January 1, 2016 was 27.2 years. And we would be out. There'd be none left in our section. And it's several counties in west central Illinois. So it's not something that's so far away. 27 years is not all that long. so that is risk.
I think I have one more slide. Okay, so to summarize, I think what we're expecting from this U-Cycle contract term is mostly continuity. We're streamlining some elements. We're working very hard to hold the line on the spending. The Landscape Recycling Center continues to they have a test plot where they're working on food scrap recycling. They're learning about that. They took a load of corn cobs from the Sweet Corn Festival last year, so that's still in a pile composting. So that's a reference back to what I mentioned is having a lot of volume, food scrap. And U-Cycle staff is evaluating household hazardous waste collection with partners, which I mentioned as being on the intensity or toxicity side. So that's how the picture looks for us.
All right. Are there any other comments, questions? Any comments from members of the public? All right. We can move on to announcements. We have 2 that are listed. That it's Bike Month in May, and a link to the cubikemonth.weebly.com website. And then Bike to Work Day was today, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And do we have any other announcements?
I included in the packet was a free technology demonstration for wastewater treatment plants and manure management farms on their farms. So,
Great. Other announcements? All right. We have no further business before us. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Second. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. We're adjourned.